Good morning. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Gittin Daf Pei Dalet, and we're starting at the bottom of Pei Gimel Amud Beis, about 10 or 12 lines from the bottom where it says Omar Rava. And here we'll be speaking about a couple more cases of Gittin. The Gemara opens Pei Gimel Amud Beis toward the bottom, 10 lines from the bottom. Omar Rava. He says, this will be your divorce as long as you agree not to drink wine for the duration of my life. Ein zekrisus, that's not considered a proper severance, and the divorce is not valid. Kol yemei chayi ploni. However, if he says you're hereby divorced as long as you don't drink in the life of somebody else, so then that is considered krisus. The Gemara is obviously bothered by that. Why is it that with a random person we would consider that to be reasonable? So says the Gemara, how can that be? The same is true by the husband. What's the difference in the husband and the other person? It's such an odd split to say that if he says it in the life of the husband, then it's not krisus. But if she's not allowed to drink in the life of another person on the planet, there's no nafkamina. So the Gemara says you're right. 5 lines from the bottom, 6 lines from the bottom at the first of the long lines. It must be kol yemei chayachi of your life. That's ein zekrisus, but kol yemei chayai or chayi ploni harei zekrisus, and that clarifies that case. Obviously, there's a difference between herself, where she makes a personal commitment to not do something, which is an unreasonable commitment, but to say it in regards to anybody else's life is considered a real get. 5 lines from the bottom. Rava says from Nachman, Hayom at ishti ulamachar at ishti. Today you're not my wife, and tomorrow you will be my wife. So we're going to be divorced for a day. So the Gemara says, under such circumstances, mahu. And this question is both tiboy Rabbi Eliezer and tiboy Rabbanan. This is true both in regards to the shita Rabbi Eliezer that yesterday we spent a very long time analyzing, and as well the shita of the Rabbanan. And let's dig into both possible avenues for the question. The Gemara says, Tiboy Rabbi Eliezer, Ad kan lo kam Rabbi Eliezer hasam. The only time Rabbi Eliezer says that the get is still a get, even with a condition that looms. For example, you're divorced except that you can't marry Chaim, as we were discussing. That's Ela Delamandika Shari La'olam, because that's if once a person is mutter to marry, they're mutter to marry forever. Aval hacha, perhaps that this case is different of only being divorced for one day. That's very odd. Odilma Loshna, or perhaps the rules that Rabbi Eliezer was concerned about would be the same over here. And Tibai the Rabbanan, they too, who were lenient to say that, who were strict to say that when the husband makes a condition that we're divorced as long as you're married to Chaim, the Chachamim said that doesn't work at all. Even by them, it should still be a question in regards to being divorced for one day. Because Ad kan lo kami Rabbanan hasim el de lo paskim legamre. Maybe over there in the case in the Mishnah that we were dealing with, where a husband says you're divorced, but you're just not allowed to marry Chaim, maybe over there, that's the lo paskamine legamre. There was never a full krisus, because at the end of the day, the husband held a restriction over her in some way, shape, and form. Abal hacha, but in our case, Kevan de Paska, since there was a divorce, granted, it's only for one day, but at least it's a perfect severance. The husband didn't put any funny qualifications in there. So to that, the Gemara says these are both valid approaches. And Basar de Boya, after the question was asked from Rava to Rav Nachman, Hadar Pashta, he answered the question, Mistaber bein the Rabbi Eliezer, bein the Rabbanon, Kevan de Paska, that once it doesn't matter who it is, we are always going to have a case scenario that once there is a proper break, then it's considered a proper divorce, and there is no machlokas Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanon in such a case. That brings us to a brisa at the top of Pedal and Aleph. Let's continue. Tana Rabbanan. He says, this is your get on condition that you specifically do marry a particular person. It's the opposite of our Mishnah, where it says that you just can't marry a person. So the halacha is harezu lo tinase. You're not supposed to marry this person. Ve'im nises lo teitzein. If you marry, then you should not get divorced. So this is a little bit cryptic. The Gemara is going to give 3 answers, really 2 that belong to Rav Nachman and 1 that belongs to Rava. And here are the 2 that belong to Rav Nachman. My kamar. What's pshat in this 2.5 line brisa that if a man says hareza gitech on the condition that you specifically marry Chaim, that you should not do it, but if you do, you should not get divorced. So Amar Rav Nachman, he says hachi kamar. This is pshat in the brisa. Harezu lo tinase lo. Really, you should not marry. If Ruvain says I don't want you to marry Chaim, really you should not marry Chaim. And why is that? Because we're concerned that Shema Yomru Neshehan nosnin b'matana, because then it looks like the optics are not good, but that doesn't pass the smell test. Then it looks like you're giving your wife to someone, which is inappropriate. It doesn't sound right. So that's why it's not allowed. But v'im nises le'acher, and if in fact she married somebody else, not Chaim, she married David, she married Yaakov, so then lo teitze, she should not get divorced. So this is difficult because the Gemara says, you've taken your rabbinic concern and turned it into a much bigger concern. Your rabbinic concern is that there's some poor optics, that it looks like you're giving your wife to someone, which is of course inappropriate. But over here, if that's true, you're then allowing Eishes Ish, because the condition of the get was that she can only marry Chaim, but was that she should marry Chaim, but not to marry David or Yaakov. So if that's the case, then your concern is pales in comparison to the problems that you just caused. Ela Amar Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman says you're right, and really Hachika Amar. Really, this is the right way to understand the brisa at the top of the page. Again, the brisa is on the second line where he says Hareza Gitech, on condition that you marry Chaim, and then it says that you should not marry this person. You shouldn't marry Chaim, but if you do, then lo teitze. Here's the second approach as to how to understand that brisa. Hareza lo tinase lo. It's the same as before. That the first half of the brisa is still correct. That she, Rachel, should not marry Chaim, because Shema Yomer Neshen Nosin B'Matana, because of the optics, as we mentioned, that it doesn't look good, that you're basically giving your wife to another person. V'imni says lo, and if in fact she does marry Chaim in violation of the rabbinic injunction, then lo teitze mishum gzera lo mafkina. That in those cases you should not get divorced. You shouldn't marry Chaim because the optics are bad. But if she does marry Chaim, we're not going to force them to get divorced. It's not enough of a reason for them to actually get divorced. So to this, the Gemara has a big problem as well. How can you say that she's allowed to do this? That's not correct. That you're saying that she really needs to be able to fulfill her Amar le Rava. Excuse me, I skipped the line. Oh, sorry. So the Gemara says Amar le Rava. Rava says back to Rav Nachman, if this is your approach, then you've left an implication. If what you're saying is, in the beginning of the brisa, that lo, in regards to Chaim, that Rachel in regards to Chaim is huda lo tinase, that she should not be marrying that person. So says the Gemara, if that's true, so then hala acher tinase. It implies that if she's not allowed to marry Chaim, who is the condition of the divorce, then perhaps she is allowed to marry somebody else. Perhaps she is allowed to marry Chaim or Yaakov. So to this, the Gemara says about that diuk, that's not possible. The diuk that you've left over, Rav Nachman, is an unreasonable diuk, because then the get is not going to be fulfilled, because there was a condition in the get that she should marry Chaim. And v'chi tema, efshar de mintzah hayom umigru shalom achar umakayma l'tna'a. Let's say that maybe she'll still fulfill her condition. She'll marry David, she'll get divorced, and then later she'll marry Chaim. Maybe that's a possibility. And then says the Gemara, that's how they'll fulfill their opinion. And really, there's another sheet of Rav Nachman that looks like this, similar to what happened to Pligas Alei de Rav Yehuda Kide that in a similar case, we see that Rav Nachman and Rav Yehuda argue, and Rav Nachman takes a similar approach. What is that case? The Itmar, we're a quarter of the way down on Pei Daled Amud Aleph. The Itmar, the Amoraim discussed the following case: Konem Einai B'Shena Hayom Imishan Lamachar. Not allowed to sleep today if I'm going to sleep tomorrow. Nothing that we should ever take upon ourselves. So Amar Rav Yehuda Al Yishan Hayom, you should not sleep today. Shema Yishan Lamachar. You should not sleep today because it may be tomorrow. What does Rav Nachman say? Rav Nachman Amar Yishan Hayom ve'in choshesh Shema Yishan Lamachar. You can sleep today. It's fine. Tomorrow is tomorrow. And by the way, this is very similar to what Rav Nachman was saying a couple of lines ago in our sugya, because in our sugya, Rav Nachman was, or it's really Rava was saying it on behalf of Rav Nachman. If you want to say, don't worry, the condition may or may not be fulfilled in the future. So this is a theme. We see that this is consistent with Rav Nachman. So to this, the Gemara says that doesn't work either. Hachi hashta. How can you compare the case that we started with? That's our case of a husband who puts in a condition that you specifically have to marry Chaim. How does that compare to the case of a person who's konem, who makes a commitment, a neder, about their sleep? In regards to sleep, you can control your behavior. You can decide not to sleep. How so? If you wanted, every time you get tired, you could poke yourself with a needle and you'll wake up. No problem. You'll be fine. So that's a possibility. There you have control. But here, if she marries David as part of a go-between moment so that she can then marry Chaim, and then the get will be Chal, because the condition here on the get was to marry Chaim. So maybe you could marry someone in the in-between. So you can't control that. The husband is the one who has to give the get, not the woman. So if she marries David as an interim and says, "Don't worry, I'll fulfill my get later, and I'll marry Chaim after I'm married to David," but that's not possible. She has no control. So Rava rejects Rav Nachman, which is historically interesting because Rav Nachman was either a Rebbe or certainly the older generation. Rav Nachman was a 3rd century Amora, and Rava was a 4th century Amora. So it's still difficult to exactly understand how this dialogue happened. Was he a Rebbe? Was he not a Rebbe? Fine. Ella Amar Rava. Rava then gives a third and final explanation of our brisa. Again, we're looking at the brisa at the top of the page on the second line. The brisa reads, "Hareza gitei chamanasha tinasi leploni." You're only divorced if you marry Chaim. So the din is that we said that they should not get married because it's not appropriate. It looks like you're giving away your wife to another person. And then it says, even if you do get married, you're not divorced. So now Rava is going to give his the third explanation to this brisa. Just about halfway down, a little bit more than a third of the way down on page Daled Amar Aleph, Amar Rava, Harezu lo tinaseh lo lo v'lo acher. No, she can't get married to anybody. She can't marry Chaim, and she can't marry anybody else. Lo tinaseh, to him, to Chaim, to the guy who is the condition that we're only divorced if you marry Chaim. She can't marry that guy because Shemar Yorman Shasei Nosim b'matana. Because the optics don't look good. Because it looks like you're giving your wife, that Reuven, who was married to Rachel, is giving Rachel to Chaim. Doesn't look right. And la'achar lo tinaseh, and she can't marry anybody else either, says Rava. Why? Because the boya kiyume l'tana. Because the condition was to marry Chaim. So you're stuck. One is a gzera derabanan and one is a din deraisa. Gzera derabanan is you can't marry Chaim, and the din deraisa is that you're not divorced until you marry Chaim. So you're stuck. You're trapped in the twilight zone of not being able to marry. And V'im says, what did the brisa mean at the top of the page when it says, "And if you marry," so says the Gemara, lo teitze mishum gzera de lo mafkina. If she does in fact marry Chaim and breaks the rule, again, the rule was the smell test rule, that it doesn't look good, the optics are not good, that you're giving your wife to someone. But if she in fact still married Chaim, if that's the case, they should not divorce because of a din derabanan, because of gzera derabanan. And la'achar teitze, if she's married to somebody else, she should definitely get divorced, because you need to get divorced because you didn't fulfill your condition. So that's how Rava skins and re-understands and puts the Mishnah back, the brisa back together. And in fact, there's a brisa like Rava. Tanya kavasi the Rava, harezo lo tinaseh. When our brisa at the top of the page says that she should not get married to this person, that's lo lo v'lo acher. She shouldn't marry either person. She shouldn't marry Chaim because of the gzera, and she shouldn't marry anybody else because that means she's not fulfilling her tonight. And V'im Nises, this is right before the 2 dots, halfway down, a little bit more than halfway down on Pedal Aleph. V'im Nises, lo teitze la'achar teitze. That in regards to the Chaim, that she married Chaim, even though she violated a rabbinic injunction, she should not get divorced. But if she got married to anybody else, then she should get divorced because she didn't fulfill her tonight. And therefore, we see that the brisa at the top of the page, starting on the second line, follows the opinion of Rava in rejection of the 2 shitas of Rav Nachman. Let's say that the conditions of the get are completely unreasonable. The Gemara says, you're divorced only if you go up to the heavens. You only go to the depths of the earth. You're divorced if you swallow a reed that's 4 amos long. If you bring me a reed that's 100 amos long, that you should walk on water, that you should be able to walk over the Yamagadol, the Atlantic, whatever body of waters. Basically, all of these conditions are impossible. They're all physically impossible. So says the Gemara, Eino get. None of these are considered a get. They're unfulfillable conditions. It's a zero. It's not a get. Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema Omer, kazeh get. This taka is a get because of the same exact reason. Because it's impossible, which means that your get is a joke. Your get is your condition, I should say, is a joke. So your get's fine. If you put a condition that in the get that says, "Hareza gitech," if you can fly in the air, on your own. So that's a machlokes tanan. But lemaisa, the Yehuda ben Beseira says, Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema says, because your condition is so ridiculous that it doesn't even qualify as a condition. And then the brisa here adds in another layer. This is actually a Tosefta, and the Tosefta adds klal amar Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema, 2/3 of the way down, a little bit more. Kol t'nai she'ef shar lo lekaimo besofo. If you put in a condition that's impossible to do, all you're doing is trying to be difficult to her, and therefore your get is kosher. You're just being annoying. You're being an annoying husband. So you say, I'm only giving you a get if you can fly. So it says Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema, stop being a jerk. She's divorced. Your condition was a zero. Now, it's interesting that he had said kazeh get, and he also added in the klal. And the Gemara is now going to analyze, why is it that he used both of these languages? Why couldn't Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema just say kazeh get, And also, why did he say get? Why didn't he just say get? It's an odd language. And then why did he add in a klal? So first of all, Amar Rav Nachman Amar Rav Halachik Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema, we paskin like him, that if a condition is ridiculous and impossible, that it's useless, and therefore the condition is useless, but the get is totally kosher, and the useless condition doesn't ruin the get. We have an implication like this in a Mishnah as well. Diktani, the Brisa, the Mishnah writes. Is this a Mishnah? What is this? This is a Brisa in Maseches Bava Metzia. If you have a condition that is fulfillable, then Tano Kaim. And if you fulfill it, then great. If it's impossible, if the condition that you put in is walking on water, floating in the air, going up to the heavens, whatever the case may be. So if it's Efshar Tano Batel Shema Mina, we therefore see that Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema is the one that we paskin like. Now the Gemara takes it up a level, and this is an awesome question. We've been asking about conditions that are in a get that are impossible to fulfill. What about conditions in a get that are halachically impossible to fulfill? So the Gemara says, I'm giving you a get on condition that you eat basar chazer, that you eat pig. Now, on the one hand, you could put the pig in your mouth. It's usher, but you could do it. It's physically possible, even though halachically prohibited. At the same time, halacha should be like a brick wall. If the answer is no, then the answer is no. So how do we view a condition that's halachically not allowed? Do we look at it as physically possible, and therefore it's a condition that's functional? Or do we view it as halachically impossible, and therefore the condition is batel? So it says the Gemara, Mahu Amar Abaye Hihi. Abaye says, no, this is the same thing. It's a brick wall. If the halacha says you're not allowed to eat chazer, you're not allowed to eat chazer. Conversation short. Rav Amar, no, you got that's not my problem. You have to decide what you want to do. So the husband says, so according to Rava, they're only divorced if she actually eats chazer and takes the punishment. Because while physically it's possible, halachically it's impossible, Rava says because it's physically possible, that makes it a real condition. Abaye, according to Abaye, where does he get his shita from? So when in the brisa above, Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema added the klal, says the Gemara, klal asuye b'sar chazer, that comes to include things that are granted physically possible, but they're halachically not allowed. Those are the same as the things that are physically impossible. And when, according to Rava, he says kazeh. When it says kazeh like this, that's a language of exclusion, and that's the me'ute b'sar chazir. That's coming to exclude b'sar chazir, to say no, that is something you can do. So it's physically possible. Okay, it's halachically impossible. That's your problem. So decide if you want to eat the b'sar chazer. How badly do you want to get divorced? Do you want to break an isser deraisa, yes or no? But the condition is functional. Now the Gemara questions this machlokas Abaye and Rava. And again, what we're looking at is, do we say that a physical impossibility as a condition in a get, is that the same as a halachic isser in a get? And let's use walking on water as one extreme. That's physically impossible and therefore irrelevant. Or do we say that halachically, because now let's add in pig, but if the condition is to eat chazer because it's physically possible but halachically impossible, how do we view that? Abaye says that eating chazer as a condition of the t'nai is no different than walking on water. Halacha makes it halachically impossible, therefore it's physically impossible. Or no, like Rava, that you have to just choose what you want to do. Now the Gemara asks against one of these shitas. Says the Gemara, this is your get if you sleep with person X. If she does in fact sleep with person X, then they're divorced. Being lab, ain't no get. Or so in the first case where they say you need to sleep with David in order for your get to count, so then the din is that it depends what she does. And in the second case of you're divorced if you don't sleep with with my father or your father. What case was omitted from this brisa? So the Gemara says, we don't have the case present over here on the condition that she does in fact sleep with her father or with her father-in-law. Why not? Because we'll see in a moment. According to Abaye, the reason why that case was omitted is because, halachically speaking, it's not an option. So they didn't put in the case of almanas that she does sleep with them, because according to Abaye, halacha is a brick wall. And if halacha says you're not allowed to do something, then you can't use it as a t'nai in the get. And le Rava Kasha, over here, according to Rava, according to his approach, that it's simply a choice to be made. And you can decide if you want to... And you can decide if you want us to do that. Then according to Rava, it should have been present in this brisa, and it's not. So Amar Lach Rava, last of the short lines, 4 lines from the bottom. According to Rava, Amar Lach Rava, Bishlama b'sar chazir efshar da'achla v'lakya. It's possible, says Rava, that at least there's a physical possibility in regards to the B'sar Chazir. That's why I say, says Rava, that B'sar Chazir is considered a real possibility. And the condition is, if you choose to do it, is Chal. And Ploni Nami, even in the case of Ploni, where the condition was, the first case in the Brisa, 10 lines from the bottom, that if you sleep with X, then you're divorced. If you sleep with W, then you're divorced. There are two after the Mashachta Lebe Mamona. She could convince him, she could pay him to sleep with him, to marry him even. Could be mutter, no problem. That's not even an isser. That's solvable. If the condition is that she needs to do X in order to get divorced, you can't say that X is to sleep with someone who won't be willing to sleep with her by a random guy that she might want to marry, or she can pay someone. So then they can sleep together, fine. Then she can fulfill the condition. But says the Gemara, we hear two lines from that. Maybe she's willing to sleep with her father, or will sleep with her father-in-law. Maybe, but who says that they are? Abba ve'avich mi avdi isura. So Rava wriggles out of this particular case. And therefore, how then does Rava look at the double language of kazeh get and klal, the language that Rabbi ben Tema used above? Says Rava, when he says klal, when he says the general rule, that inclusive language, that's le'asuye abba ve'avich, to say that that's a t'nai of efshar l'kayim. That's not possible, and therefore they'd be divorced. And kazeh, when it says kazeh, he uses that language lemi'ute b'sar chazir to say that case is not part of our Rabbi ben Tema, because that's a real condition that can be fulfilled. There's a difference in what she's capable of doing. She's able to go buy a piece of bacon and eat it. She's not able to just say, I'm going to sleep with my father or my father-in-law. That's not possible. And Abaye, how would Abaye approach the kazeh and the klal of Rabbi ben Tema? Top of Pedal Amud Beis. We're going to go mostly toward the bottom, probably going to stop 2/3 of the bottom, toward the bottom at the two dots. Abaye, he says klal asuye b'sar chazir. He says the inclusive language of klal is to include the case of b'sar chazir, that it is not considered a good tonight. And kazeh le'ma'ute ploni says in the case of kazeh, that's to exclude the case of sleeping with person X. Fine. The Brisa asks another question and says, I have another problem. That's one case of the same condition that we saw before. You're divorced if you eat pig. If she's not a Kohen, on the condition that you eat truma, even though she's not allowed to. All of these cases, says the Brisa, this Brisa that we have on the top of Pedal Amud Beis, over here, we see that these things are completely usher, and we see that they're just up to you. If you do it, then you're okay. That's beautiful. That's a Rava l'shitaso. That's b'sar chazir. So then Rava's got a beautiful Mari Makom that shows that even though these people are usher to consume these foods, if it's a condition of their get, only if they do that isser are they then divorced. So the Rava nichal l'Abaye kasha. Amar l'Abaye, no. Who says that Brisa? We don't know who that is. And we know from the Brisa that we started with on the bottom of Pedal Amud Beis, to 10 lines from the bottom, that it's a machlokas Rabbi ben Tema, a little bit higher than 10 lines from the bottom. Machlokas Rabbi ben Tema and the Rabbanan. So perhaps, says the Gemara, Hamani, who is this Rabbanan? Asks the Gemara, wait 1 second. All of these conditions, they're masnal mashikasa b'Torah. You can't make a condition that requires me to break halacha. Says the Gemara, but tepuk lei, maybe we should be concerned about the following. That when the husband says, when you're in Nazira, all the things that are usher for them to do, it's a zero. You should not be able to do this. How can your Tanai function at all? So says the Gemara, Amar Rav Ada brother of Ika, Ki Amrinan Masnal Mashakasu B'Torah, to know Batel. When do we say that a person is Masnal Mashakasu B'Torah and is Batel? That's when the husband is doing something wrong. It's about me being Mavatel something. That's Kigon She'erak Susavona. So when a husband doesn't take care of his wife, he's the one who did it wrong. I can't make a condition that says, this is my neder as long as I never sleep with my wife again. That's psukim and chumash. That's masna mashiko. I'm being ma'aker the chiyuv of my own chiyuv. So says the Gemara, aval hacha ihi ka'akra. She's the one who's doing it. He made the condition. She's the one who's breaking the rules. He's not being ma'aker. She broke the condition. So says the Gemara, maskif laravina klum ka'akra ihi. She is absolutely not the one who started this. He is. What was his condition? Ela l'kiyumi l'tnai didei. She was just doing what he said, and therefore, ishtakach. What do we see from here? The ihu ka'akar. It's really him. That's not a good argument. Ella says the Gemara. How do we get around the concern of masna mashakasu b'Torah? Lamar Ravina, third of the way down on Pedal Amud Beis. Kiamina masna mashakasu b'Torah to know bata. When is that going to share k'sus the vadai ka'akar? When it's definite that there's going to be an akira. Aval hacha mika amar la lo sagya de lo achla. I made a condition. You don't want to eat the treif? Don't get divorced. That's up to you. I'm not forcing your hand. Stay married to me. You want to be divorced, you got to go treif. But that's up to you now. That's totally up to you. And because she's being given an option, therefore it's not considered problematic. Lo techul, but lo tigaresh. If you don't get divorced, all is fine and good. One more little sugya, and then we'll stop. Kate said, that again, if a divorce is given, this is going back to our Mishnah from a couple of blot ago. If a document is given and there's a condition that says we're divorced, except that you can't marry Chaim, we had seen that Rabbi Lazar said no problem that they're divorced. But the Chachamim said you're not divorced. So what do? They said you have to take the get back and then reissue it. So says the Gemara, Man Tana, who's the author of the Chachamim in our Mishnah, who opposes Rabbi Eliezer, says the Gemara, Merchizke Reb Shimon ben Elazar. The time Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer Achit Lenu Heimenu v'Yachshav B'Nana Love Yomer Lo Higitech. Here's your get, no conditions. Clean, krisus mamash. That's what the Chachamim hold against Rabbi Eliezer, and really says the Gemara, the Chachamim in our Mishnah who oppose Rabbi Eliezer is Reb Shimon ben Elazar. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, that's not true. That's not correct, because that line afilu tema Reb Meir. It could even Rebbe, it could be Rebbe. How is that? Because Rebbe said the following line: Dilchon, your person told me. Rashi 10, 12 lines down, a little bit more, 12 lines down. Dilchon Amar, your person, Rav Kahana. Shahai Mishalachem, Mi Bavel, Shalal Lil Motor, Rabbi Yochanan. He called him you're not a towner. He said to him, Dilchon, your guy Rav Kahana who came from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, that guy. Dilchon Amar, Shani Hacha Holukna Aso, Lifsol Bo. That in such a case in our Mishnah, that if there were to be a get like that, it would be enough to create a psul in the kahuna. That would even be according to Rebbe. We'll stop right here at Kisvu Besocho, wishing you all a beautiful day.